Arguments against incinerators. They generate a toxic ash which is poorly handled in the United States. They generate toxic air emissions which are poorly monitored in the United States. They are extremely expensive and a poor investment for our children. They are very unpopular with the public and pushed into communities often undemocratically. And incineration is simply not sustainable. And there are better alternatives which are. I got involved in this issue in 1985. And between 1985 and 1995, over 300 incinerator proposals were defeated.
We believe that everyone has the right to live in a healthy community. That right is not reserved for only some people, but should include everyone. However, anyone that lives in Curtis Bay knows its history, knows and understands that this very basic human right has been violated for generations. Our community has historically been used as a dumping ground, exposed to dangerous chemicals. I mean, we're already home to the city's landfill, to the nation's largest medical waste incinerator, and have some of the worst air pollution in the state.
Perhaps Alonzo Spencer tells the story best. Alonzo first approached CHEJ seeking help in his community's battle against a hazardous waste incinerator in East Liverpool, Ohio. Today, Alonzo serves as chairman of the board for the center.
That building right off from the stack is the rotary kill. That's where the kill is. They can't tell us to this day what exactly is coming out of that stack.
Every struggling community or group to take a stand to fight off these enemies, because together we stand and divided we fall.
You know, to me, this chemical threat is still real. It could be in your backyard next.
Agency says a hazardous waste incinerator in East Liverpool exposed people to chemicals that can cause cancer, miscarriages, and early death. An EPA investigation found that the Heritage Thermal Services incinerator emitted gases with high levels of toxic chemicals 195 times from November of 2010 to December of 2014. The emissions were caused by both mechanical failures and operator errors. Heritage could face fines or penalties for those violations.
Loose in the area, and it is a major concern. It's a health issue.
The EPA characterized them as cancer-causing toxins. Heritage can burn about 60,000 tons of household and chemical commercial waste each year. An EPA investigation revealed that cancer-causing toxins had been released into the air 195 times over a 4-year period from 2010 to 2014.
These facilities are a waste of energy. You save 4 times as much energy by reusing and recycling. To talk about zero emissions is total scientific poppycock. It is impossible to convert thousands of tons of trash into nothing. The message to industry is this: if we can't reuse it, if we can't recycle it, if we can't compost it, you shouldn't be making it. To talk about zero emissions is total scientific poppycock. It is impossible to convert thousands of tons of trash into nothing. What you do is you convert it, thousands of tons of trash, in a high temperature process into zillions of particles. And there's a whole new subject today called nanopathology, which is exploring the really serious health connotations of nanoparticles. Nanoparticles are so tiny they evade some of the most efficient air pollution control devices. They get deep down into the lungs. They're so small they go straight through the membranes of the lungs into the bloodstream, circulate throughout the body, and again pass through the membranes of all your tissues, including the blood-brain barrier. So amongst other things, you're introducing into the brain tiny particles of neurotoxic substances like toxic metals. This also includes the dioxins and the furans, which have been the subject of much discussion. So when anybody tells you zero emissions, they clearly don't know what they're talking about. It's PR. They talk about gasification. They love these new names. They want to use every name except incinerator. They're ashamed of the name. They know the public hate these things. But we call them gasification, pyrolysis, plasma arc. This only refers to the stage 1 of the process. If it stopped there, if it was converting solids to gases or these very, very tiny particles in plasma arc, if it stopped there, the name would be legitimate. But it doesn't stop there. Once you produce these gases, they are burnt. And once you burn these gases, you have all the same problems of a regular incinerator. You have to put on the whole series of expensive air pollution control devices in a futile attempt to capture those toxics. And if you are successful at capturing those toxics, then you've got them in the fly ash, which is extremely toxic, and now you've got a problem of where to put that fly ash. Raymond also pointed out these are coming out in the form of nanoparticles. Very tiny particles. And here is something, this is probably the single most important thing for you to understand on toxic air emissions. There is no regulation for any incinerator in the world for nanoparticles. They are not measuring the nanoparticles, they're not accountable for nanoparticles. They regulate the particles coming out of incinerators at 10 microns. In Europe, they're talking about bringing that down to 2.5 microns. But all of these are like cannonballs compared to the nanoparticles, which are a fraction of a micron. Nanoparticles are not efficiently captured by air pollution control devices. They travel long distances and they remain suspended for long periods of time. Especially in the situation of Raymond, I would underline what he said about the funnel. It will just be sitting there for years and years. And they penetrate deep down into the lungs. Now, they not only penetrate deep down into the lungs, which is a problem, but these particles are so tiny they can cross the membranes. So they get down to the lungs, straight through the lung membrane into the bloodstream, and then they're distributed to every tissue in the body, and there they can enter every tissue in the body, including the brain. They can cross the blood-brain barrier, and here's an electron micrograph showing a particle in the brain, and it contains lead, barium, chromium, iron, and silicon. You really don't want that stuff in your brain, and certainly not your children's brains. They just steadily accumulate, but the woman can get rid of dioxins by having a baby. So here's the situation. This, to me, is the most serious thing. In the 9 months of pregnancy, the dioxins will be mobilized with the fat and will transfer from the mother's body to the fetus, at which time the concentration in the fetus increases astronomically. So here are the conclusions on the dioxin part of this. We shouldn't be putting any more dioxin into the environment if we can possibly avoid doing so, and incineration is an avoidable source of dioxin. Other dioxin-like compounds, we're not talking about just dioxins, PCBs, there are 209 of those, polybrominated biphenyls, there's 209 of those, brominated furans, there's 135 of those, polybrominated dibenzodioxins, there's 75 of those, mixed brominated and chlorinated dibenzodioxins, there's 5,000 of those, polybrominated diphenyl ethers, there's God knows how many of those, polybrominated and chlorinated naphthalenes, nitrogen and sulfur analogs. We're talking thousands and thousands of substances, and we've hardly begun to measure the emissions in incinerators. We've just focused on the top family of dioxins and furans. Incineration is poorly and unscientifically monitored. You need three things to protect the public. One is strong regulations, but the best way that you can get strong regulations to protect yourselves and your babies is to get those regulations, put a hole here and a hole here and a rubber band and make them into face masks. Because you need three things to protect you and your children. You need strong regulations, you need adequate monitoring, and you need tough enforcement. Now, as far as adequate monitoring, you've heard already, there is no monitoring for nanoparticles. And I think you have some idea, perhaps, of the enforcement capacities of the British Columbian government. If any link is weak, the public is not protected. You are the best protection. Right now, you are the best protection. Stop this facility from being built. That's your protection. Do not burn our future.
understanding it's not, my understanding it's, first of all, it's not biohazardous, it's not medical waste or anything like that. It's not garbage. Basically, it's things like pharmaceutical plants up north, when they're making, say, penicillin, when they get done with a batch, they have residue of penicillin that's left. When they clean the vats out, it has to be incinerated. It can't go into the dumps or in the river, of course, because that's how we have problems with the fish in the water streams. So those are things that would be destroyed in the incinerator. There's also would be things like from the big home improvement stores, like if they've got paint and stuff that is damaged, instead of going to landfill, it would get incinerated and get burned up. Even extending it out to the public, so that the public, if you had, like your chemicals on your sink and you wanted to get rid of those instead of throwing them into the dump. I mean, you know very well what happens when we keep throwing all this stuff into the land. It gets into the water table and everything else. So, they're looking at, they could have community days too, where people could bring stuff to their homes and get it disposed of. The nice thing about this is it has far more regulations than our compressor stations do. There's no plans. There's no plans of an incinerator. There's no drawings showing the size of the incinerator or the capacity of it. Well, it's not up to me. It's up to the township to make a decision whether it's going to go into their area or not. We don't have any control over what people do on their land. It wouldn't be the residents here. I mean, it would be coming from other areas throughout the state, I'm sure, as well as from New York State. Well, I know who called it hazardous waste. It's not hazardous waste. Again, you keep using the word hazardous waste, and that's an incorrect term. So it's an incinerator that incinerates products that need to be incinerated instead of going into the landfills. Well, of course, the assumption you're making then is that what's getting incinerated is coming out of the stacks, and that's not true.
What's being brought into it, what is going to come out of that stack. Alan explained that it was going to be steam.
The only information we had is that and I think they said the incinerator project itself was only like 4 acres or something like that. That the rest of the area was being used for industrial development for other businesses as a corporate park.
Well, what we know so far is a private venture firm called the Tyler Corners Group, led by Assured Waste Solutions and Sterling Advisors. They are wanting to build the industrial hazardous waste incinerator in New Milford Township. The other partner is known as Tunnel Hills Partners. And if you go onto their website, you will see a variety of products that they incinerate, including contaminated soil, drill cuttings, and other special hazardous waste, whatever that might be. What comes out of those incinerators is more than steam.
Well, again, as Mary Ann said, and I believe too, when we see something that will raise a concern, then we'll address it. But right now, we don't see anything.
To talk about zero emissions is total scientific poppycock. It is impossible to convert thousands of tons of trash into nothing. Do not burn our future.